happening. And when I hear people talk about the future of work, it becomes very deterministic. The study that was cited in the keynote by Frey and Osborne from Oxford Martin School is one of many studies that forecast these futures as if we have no control over them.
But if we get those numbers wrong, or we under-prepare, we will be in a very serious situation.
Well, so that's the role of law and policy. We can guarantee full employment, we can create jobs, we can control the pace of automation, we can do a lot of things to give people a fighting chance so that they're not automated out of dignity and having the right to work.
The machines are rising, they're taking away our voices. As the lawyer of this panel, my favorite thing in my line of work is killing bad laws and bad ideas. And I think it's very problematic to try to regulate the future of work and AI in that space without even knowing what it's going to look like. In 1963, the cover of the Life magazine said that everything is going to be automated and everyone is going to be out of work. That still hasn't happened. Obviously, a lot of changes came along the way, and all the studies obviously can present both sides of the argument, but we will never know until we are in it.
Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. You want to be in the mess before you create a solution to it.
No, we should think about the solutions, but we shouldn't legislate on them before knowing what situation we're in.
Well, we do know that a technological, David, we do know that a technological revolution is underway, one that will have profound effects on.
Right, but so first of all, you can't regulate every single AI industry, right? They're very different. Let's say truckers versus use of AI in hiring.
No, carry on.
My company builds AI solutions that affect people's jobs, and so we're at the forefront of this. And as long as we are continuing to try to sell more stuff to people and squeeze more out of our operations and reduce labor to increase profits, we are going to continue to remove tasks, and at some point we will be removing whole jobs. So it's predicted in the next 10, 15 years we will be removing whole jobs, and people won't be able to retrain. I disagree. People won't be able to retrain fast enough to get new jobs, and our economies are not set up for it, and I don't think legislation will work. I think that companies can move much more quickly.
Just let's dissect what you've said. That we won't be able to retrain, and there won't be the jobs available, or the people will not be able to. That's what you just said, correct?
Because AIs can take those future jobs.
Right. That will have a societal effect, correct?
Correct.
How prepared are we for that? Yes.
I mean, it depends on the country, obviously. It depends on the legal system, on the rule of law in the country, on the economy and how it's built. I think as a world, like international economy, the world economy is definitely not as prepared as it should be. And that's why forums like this should bring us all together to figure out the solutions and the plan when things start happening.
I'm so astonished at the idea that we can't legislate around this stuff. I mean, I'm no particular fan of legislation, but legislation is essentially what has protected the vast majority of people from the predations of industry and corporations for the last century. The idea that this is some kind of fourth industrial revolution is frankly terrifying to me. The only thing that stopped, has prevented unfettered industrial revolution from destroying the planet thus far is some level of legislation and protection around this. And particularly tech companies know this, right? Google and Facebook and other companies are the largest donors to US politics at present. They put the most money into presidential candidates in order to prevent legislation, because they know that legislation would affect their businesses in a serious way. And so when we hear that like legislation can't keep up with this, that's just saying that we're not smart enough to think about this. We all are. The kind of things that we've seen happening, particularly in Europe, around where there has been legislation, meaningful legislation around this. Again, I'm no fan of GDPR, but it is an effective attempt at effectively managing data. The right to be forgotten is a really important, powerful piece of legislation. Countries have stepped in the last just couple of weeks. France and Germany have said they're not going to permit Facebook to create an extra-national legal currency. That's states acting on behalf of their citizens to oppose the unfettered rule of these companies.
David, on this question of I was most taken by what you said and what James just said, in the sense that society is going to have to deal with this. Are we not better off preparing now? The people in this room who are the experts in their companies, the people like you, prepare now rather than wait in 20 years' time, 15 years' time, to have a disenfranchised, truculent, riotous public.
I think that as long as, I'm going to be a bit bold here, as long as we have countries with the objective function of fighting for GDP, as long as we have companies wanting to make profits, we are not going to solve the problem. And I actually have a 30-year plan to remove the concept of companies, and hopefully eventually remove the concept of countries. And I think decentralization is an enabler of that future world.
Is that realistic?
Yes.
How do you feel about losing your company?
Well, you know,
Like,
I don't know of any company that made losses and recruited a lot of people. So therefore, companies will have to make profit as long as they make those profits legally and ethically, using the best principles of corporate governance, not violating any law of the land. They must make profits and create jobs. Because if the companies don't make profits, they will not be able to create more and more jobs. Second point, if you looked at the history of the world in the last, at least just take 100 years, starting from assembly line of Ford, developed countries which absorb technology earlier than developing countries have been able to create more jobs, have been able to combat unemployment better than developing countries. So there is the question of saying that technology leads to loss of jobs. As I pointed out by Professor Carlota Perez, in the short term it will seem like that, but in the medium term it will be actually beneficial.
So, if I'm mischaracterizing my panelists' comments, what I kind of hear is basically creative destruction will always create more than it destroys.
Eventually.
Yeah, so it's what happens in the interim between something else coming along. So, one of the things that I've been involved in, and one of the tropes I've heard develop is to say, in the UK at least, the logistics industry, the trucking industry will be one of the first to be automated. But that's okay. We have a nursing shortage in the UK, so we will just retrain all of our truck drivers to be nurses as if humans are just interoperable and there's no other skill set that's required. They're just a raw resource.
Okay, so there are 3 points about the truckers. Truckers don't just drive the cars. They provide security, they do the paperwork. There are a lot of more things that machines can replace in any near future. And to James's 2 points, so you said about Europe having regulations and being fine. I agree, and I mean, I respect the way everything is there. But if you look at Europe versus US, US is the world leader in technology because they didn't have restrictions in the 90s. The Clinton administration did the opposite. It let the technology companies develop, and that's why we have Silicon Valley.
So to go back to the original question, I don't think that we're prepared for this at all. I think that there's strong evidence that it's already having an impact. If you look in the United States, there's been found to be a direct correlation between those regions that have lots of jobs that have been susceptible to the impact of technology and voters that voted for Donald Trump in 2016. So we've already seen political disruption. It was very unexpected as a result of this. Many people have talked about the fact that we shouldn't have regulation. It's not just regulation that is a potential solution to this. We can think about things like a universal basic income, ultimately. These are ideas that don't involve restricting technology, but can help us to create solutions that we can adapt our society and our economy to this as it progresses.
I mean, one of the places we're going with this conversation fairly obviously is that any technological problem at sufficient scale is a political and social problem first. And those are the questions that have to be argued over at this point. There is certainly the grander US technology program. My argument I would make in the context of this discussion is I'd argue against the idea that is something that's inherently democratic. So we heard, for example, the argument that, or the repeated case that the Arab Spring was something that was sort of made possible by social media. I think certain aspects of that were facilitated by parts of social media. Social media was also a huge part of how those revolutions were crushed and failed. We've seen the way in which the unrestricted deployment of Facebook in Myanmar, in Sri Lanka, has accelerated incredibly bloody conflicts in those areas. We've seen the ways in which, even pre-social media, the use of mobile phones around events like the Kenyan elections have driven violence. This is well documented.
Right, but hang on.
And just one thing. Those same ideas, the same principles behind that of the unregulated, but less than regulated, I don't care about regulation. I care about the ethics with which these systems are deployed and the ways in which they're thought through and their implications. And when there's no general oversight, I don't mean government legislation, I mean the involvement in the whole population in the decisions of these things. And without wider education, wider understanding and wider thoughtfulness about these things, you get Trumpian situations of democracy being actually under attack by these systems.
Well, hang on. There's a lot there, but you've elegantly, and thank you, taken us nicely to the next part of it, which is really the privacy, the shutting down of the internet, the use, the non-economic, if you like, areas of this. Whose responsibility is it when someone like Facebook has 2.5 billion users across multiple jurisdictions? Is it not inevitable that they will not be able to cope?
The internet presents fundamentally distinct challenges in terms of governance than other technologies. If the question is, where does blame lie? If you are making a profit off this, blame rests with you. This is a fundamental principle of how law works. If you do harm to somebody else, you're responsible for that harm. I do believe that internet...
Even when this has grown so quickly and so much faster than anybody could have predicted.
Then grow slower.
But aren't we responsible for the fact it's grown so fast?
Yeah, by hyping it up and boosting it up and treating it as something that is going to save us and liberate us from the tyranny of work, allow us to conquer life and death. Yeah, when you boost something up like that, it sounds a lot more promising than it actually is in principle.
I understand and I agree that we should focus on harm. However, you talked about Myanmar. What about Armenia using social media to oppose the government they didn't agree with just last year? Social media helps me stay in touch with my family who lives there. Social media helps me speak my mind. Social media helped a lot of minority groups who are underrepresented and never had a voice to have a platform. So we can't just try to squash it right away. Obviously there are harms and there are a lot of cases where we should work with these companies, find these companies if they do something wrong. But if we start swiftly trying to limit, let's say, Section 230, which regulates third-party liability online, we're going to also suppress free speech.
So where do you draw the line? How do you draw that line between what would be regarded as legitimate use versus illegitimate? Let's answer that first, because you're walking a narrow line.
The line between legitimate use of the platforms versus illegitimate?
Yes.
If there's harm that's produced to people, obviously it's illegitimate. But if there is good, it should be celebrated.
Isn't that the same argument that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist?
I think we don't have to suppress each other's human rights to do that. We can have a conversation online, for example.
Okay, Facebook's a very good example here. So if you are having to provide 5% returns to your shareholders every quarter, and if you can't do that through growth, through innovation, then what tends to happen is companies make bad decisions. They make decisions that compromise their users, compromise the environment, compromise their employees. And that is not creating a sustainable future. If you could build a platform, a decentralized platform that brought together people to build an open source version of Facebook, and you had 2 billion users, each paying $1 per year. $1 per year to access that service. That's $2 billion to service a global community of people that are driving forwards a product without the profit motive. And there's no reason why we can't create this platform that brings all these people together. And then if it does become weaponized, if it is used badly, you can turn it off without worrying about pissing off shareholders.
But are you against profit?
I am against not purposeful companies. When the profit motive becomes separate from the purpose motive, then you start to get very bad decisions.
Isn't the problem with that, it's your definition versus somebody else's?
Definition for what purpose? That's actually the key issue, because at the moment our objective function, our purpose for humanity, our pseudo-purpose is to maximize GDP. This is not a good purpose. We need to come together as a global community, not countries. We need to come together as a global community to redefine what our objective function is.
Well, give me some example of good purpose that you would find acceptable.
Economic freedom, by giving everybody, and I disagree that technology is an equalizer. Technology is an equalizer. Economic freedom is an equalizer, giving everybody the opportunity to contribute to humanity and be remunerated fairly for that contribution.
Yeah, but these are great words, but put them into practice. When you take, for example, a country like India, where the number of people brought out of poverty as a result of technology.
Yeah, well, I think it's it all depends upon what uses we put to it, and that's, I don't think we can say this is bad, that's good. It is the people who use a specific technology for either good use or bad use. I cannot imagine saying that any specific technology is bad. I mean, there are medicines which, if people took in extra doses, is not good for life, but they could act as medicines. So I personally feel that every tool, every technology, as long as it's in the hands of the right people, it could be put to good use. That's my view.
So just to push back on a couple things, the point about social media being this great democratizing force is just simply false. It has not raised up people, the same voices that would have been heard in the pre-internet era, those that still speak loudest now. It provides the illusion that people have participation in a wider conversation, but whether or not that actual signal to noise ratio trickles down into anything other than just more noise, I just don't buy that. I don't think that any of the evidence actually backs that up. And to the point on regulation, I don't think I'm going to relitigate the free market versus regulation debate here today, but what I can say is those who push back against regulation are very quick to use intellectual property, to use the legal structuring of the corporation. So regulation is good when it benefits you, except when it's telling you what not to do.
Let's pause for 1 second whilst we redeploy microphones to those who do not have them. There, that's good. Should be good. Yes, Martin.
Yeah, I just think that all these questions really get at the reality that these are qualitative judgments that are going to involve trade-offs that are going to be made differently in different countries and different societies, and that's what's going to make it almost an intractable problem for companies like Facebook. I think one practical ramification of this is that you might see kind of a balkanized internet in different countries. You see this already in China, where they've got their own internet basically, where they've got completely different standards where it comes to privacy, to the use of facial recognition.
Doesn't that go against the whole ethos of what it was all about? Martin first and then to you. Doesn't that go against the whole principle of what it was all about?
It does, and it's clear that it has not unfolded according to plan and according to the initial optimism. It's going to be a lot more complicated and problematic than what people dreamed of at the beginning of the internet.
I want to ask you, what do you all believe should be the limits of these machines? Now, we've started on the job, we've done the jobs and we've done the privacy, and clearly there's no consensus as to the way forward in that sense. We're going to choose my word, we're going to muddle through somehow. But when it comes to lethal autonomous vehicles, when it comes to the use of machinery for nefarious purposes, be it sanctioned by state or otherwise, sir?
So what you're talking about is an issue that we discussed in the EU, the high-level expert group on AI, which was red lines. Basically, context in life where we think AI should not exist, whether this is facial recognition in classrooms or whatever it is. That was lobbied off the agenda by industry interests that wanted and still want AI to be the Wild West and to allow opportunities and to people to do things, and then we'll make up the rules once we've figured out how to profit off it. And that's what we get over and over again. I think the most important conversation we have to have right now is, where don't we want these things?
Where don't we want them?
I want to challenge the fact that being industry is bad. I work for a nonprofit, but I'm sure a lot of people here actually have their own startups and work in the technology industry and have good ideas and good intentions. Being an industry and promoting your arguments and your interests is not a bad thing overall. It can't be just black and white.
But companies are more than the aggregate best intentions of their people. The corporate form allows businesses to behave in terms that...
Familiar with Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics, right? Which were kind of formulated through science fiction to say, what are the limits we should place on robots? And they're like, the robot should not do harm to a human, the robot should not allow harm to come through inaction. For me, I've always thought, and I increasingly think there's an extra law we can add to that in the present, which responds to this complexity of something like AI, which is that a robot must be able to explain its actions to a human. The greatest threat for these advanced technologies to me is, as we said, they are neither good nor bad, but they always have some kind of impact. They always are used for one of those things, right? And we don't know which one they're going to be used for. And most of all, it's impossible to control because we don't understand how those systems work. So as we develop ever more complex systems, we also need an education system that's capable of working so that we all understand how these systems function, that those systems are capable of explaining to themselves to us, rather than being kind of black box algorithms, incredibly complex machines.
How far are we? We're going to continue this line of, the limitations of robots, but for those who are not as familiar, David, how far are we actually with AI to a robot that can actually do something on its own without human intervention?
I'm going to be super controversial now, and I'm going to say that nobody's doing AI. So people are using machine learning to find patterns from data. Machine learning is not AI. After you've found patterns, after you know things about the world, you know you're male and you're female, you then need to make decisions. Decision making is a completely different set of computer science. It's discrete mathematics, it's optimization. I would argue there are about 3,000 strong people around the globe that are good at this. But ultimately you need to harmonize finding patterns, knowing things about the world, making decisions, and then adapting. So the definition of intelligence is goal-directed adaptive behavior. And if you build a system that's able to make a decision, learn about whether that decision is good or bad, so it makes a better decision tomorrow, I would argue that it's AI. And I haven't seen a single successful system in production in my life that does that yet.
Well, no, but how... But that is the goal.
Well, we are building them, yes.
I mean, that is, you may not have got there yet, but if I understand your argument, that is where you're wanting to head.
So there's a lot of hype around machine learning, which is fine. Machine learning is excellent at finding patterns, but yes, you're absolutely right. People will be gluing these technologies together, and we will be building systems that adapt themselves. And if you don't make sure that they're adapting in ways that we can predict, then they become bad very, very quickly. Does anybody remember the Microsoft Twitter bot that became racist and sexist very quickly? I don't know if you remember that. But
that was because people spotted a weakness and took advantage of it.
Yeah, it was adapting to the content that was given to it. And when you build adaptive systems without knowing how they're going to adapt, you can get bad decisions. And this is the problem with autonomous weapons. If you build AI into autonomous weapons and allow autonomous weapons to adapt, then you're in big trouble.
I think the central question in this, whether it's autonomous weapons or indeed